All right, in this video I wanted to show what you can do with shape layers in After Effects. We're actually going to start off with an Illustrator file and talk about how to convert Illustrator layers into shape layers and how that unlocks some different options. So I need to import this as these are my pre-comp icons. You can see what I have in here are a bunch of icons that are outlined. Right now they're Illustrator layers. If I open them up, you can see that I have my typical transform properties here. But when I convert these into shape layers, I'm going to be able to animate other things that are going to be really important. So I'm going to do the conversion by selecting all of them, right click, and I'll go to create shapes from vector layer. So these are Illustrator layers, vector layers. And what you can see what happened is we've created these shape layers. They look different. They have this different icon. They're a different color. And by default, After Effects turned off these other layers. So these are no longer visible. If it helps you, you could delete them. If you, maybe it tidies up your file a little bit, or you could leave them in there. Okay, so these are the new shape layers. So let's look at what's different now. You can see there is this other, these other options for contents. You can look at the path and the stroke, and so you could actually animate things like this, color opacity, and mess with this. You could make dashes, a lot of stuff here, but what I'm going to focus on is this. These are the path operators, or these are different options, and there's some nice things you can do in here. What I'm going to actually play around with is trim paths. These are all kind of fun to play with, and maybe we'll look at other applications for it. But trim paths is something that's pretty helpful because it lets us outline or draw on some of these elements. So this is that home layer right now, and you can see once I added the trim paths, I have added this trim paths here, and what I want to do is actually animate the percentage of this, and you can see what it's doing when I set everything to 0 and 0. You don't see anything, and what I want to animate is actually kind of like the drawing on effect of this. So I'm going to go up to 100, and let's see what that looks like. That's me drawing on that shape. There you go. So and we can ease that, or play around with it if we want. So I just wanted to talk about this. This is a really simple shape. It's one line. Let's go to something like this, a triangle, and let's do the same thing. Let's add trim paths, and you can see that there's a bunch of paths this time. So here you might want to approach it differently. In the past, this trim paths, multiple paths simultaneously was selected, and that could work, except depending on the effect you're going for, it's going to draw everything on at the same time. So that might, maybe you want that, or maybe you want it to be more sequential. So let's talk about what that looks like. You can see everything gets drawn at the same time. You can go into these options and go to individually, and then they will go draw on in the order that they are layered in here. So you can actually move these around, and you can see right now, I think the first thing that drew on was that pencil. And so it goes in the order that it's selected. So if I, for example, if I thought, hey, you know what, I want that pencil to animate after this, I can move the order around, and now it's going to go in the order that's set up right here. So that gives me more control over how these things go. Yeah, and so I'm just using trim paths here. Okay. So I would go ahead and maybe just to show you again how this works. I'm going to open these up. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and start to animate these on all of them, and maybe you want them to go sequentially. So I'll do them from 0 to 100, and I'll switch the mode to individually. And yeah, maybe I'll go ahead and do that with all of these layers. So open up trim paths individually. Let's keyframe from 0 to 0 up to 0 to 100. going to do the full outline. Again, we'll add it in here. Trim paths. I'll also make sure I hit individually. And let's move forward. Let's grab that. I think I've done everything. I'm going to select all the layers, hit U to close it, collapse it so I can see where my keyframes are. And like I said, if I want them to be sequential, maybe I'll just kind of order these keyframes. I can click and drag and move them around so that they happen one at a time. There might be a little bit of an overlap here. You can play around with what that looks like. And so here's my animated icon set. And that's what that looks like. I want to take this idea of using path operators with shape layers and just provide another example. In this case, I'm going to use a bar graph that's created, and I'm going to play with both trim paths and the fill here. So what I want to do is take these black bars and these white bars and convert these to shape layers. So again, I'll select them, right click, create shapes from vector layer. You'll see that those elements have turned into shape layers. And let's go about animating these on. So if I go into my contents, you can see I have 4 groups, each one corresponding to each shape. What I'll do is I'll add a path path operator, and I want to select this layer, the first layer. Let's start with group 4. So we'll go left to right, and we'll add in the trim paths, and you see that place it inside of this group here. What I'm going to do then is play with the trim paths. For the purposes of outlining this first, I'm going to turn off the fill by turning the opacity down so that you see it's a kind of faint outline. Maybe I'll bump it up so you can see that. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is just animate the start and the end. So I'm going to start at 0, or I'm going to keyframe that 0, and then I'll move forward in time, and I'll animate that. Okay, so I can see the animation moves like this. Now, it's possible that you don't want this animation to start from this corner, and if that's the case, you can offset it by dragging or changing this offset. So for example, if I wanted it to start maybe down here, I'm just offsetting it so that it moves over a little bit. Okay, so that's the first part. So what I want to happen is for the line to animate and then the fill to animate on. So I'm going to go to opacity, and we'll start at 0, and then we'll just fade on to 100. What does that look like? Animate and fill. Okay, so now what I want to do is take this type of animation and take it to all the other elements here. One thing that's helpful is I can actually copy and paste my keyframes into other layers. So if I like the timing of this, maybe what I can do is go into the next group, and I can paste into this, and it's going to paste wherever my cursor is here. So if I wanted to maybe start here, you can see I'll paste into it, and you see those keyframes got dropped in. Let's see what that looks like in more detail. So the trim paths, those same keyframe values got put in. It's really important that you're selecting the area, the right layer or the right part, so that those things transfer. And then the other thing I want to copy and paste is the fill keyframes, and so I'll go over to this area and make sure that I'm selecting the fill and paste into that, and you can see that those keyframes have been copied, and you can see that. Let's we zoom out, we've just animated the first 2 bars. So what does that look like? It's just taking a little bit of time to render. So the first 2 bars are done, and maybe just to make it a little bit more clear what we're doing, we'll watch this. I probably need to offset that one, the start of that trim path. So I'm going to go into here, and I think whatever value I used for the first one should also work. 183. I think that will be fine. And that's just so that it looks like it's animating from the bottom of the ground. Yeah. Yeah. So we can go ahead and do this to these other groups. Maybe we'll. And again, you can hit J and K to jump around to the different keyframes. So I'll go into here, copy and paste that. You can see the trim paths came in, and I'll copy and paste. You want to open them up so you can actually grab them like this. Copy and paste those keyframes. Let's put them here. We'll hit fill, paste into the fill. You can see what that looks like. And we've got one more to do, so let's just do that. Again, let's copy and paste these. Remember, these get pasted wherever the playhead is, so I'm kind of moving it around. Sorry, my window isn't fully on the screen. We're going to go into this last group, group 1, paste it into that for the trim path, and then for the fill, we'll copy and paste these keyframes, and I'm going to just hit U so I can see. Oh, it looks like I'm just barely fitting into this composition. So, whoops, I pasted it in, but I wasn't selecting the layer, so I'm going to select the layer, fill. Okay. So this last one maybe comes a little bit early. I think I want to offset this a little bit like the other ones. That was group 1. Group 2, let's change the offset a little bit. Okay, I think group 2 is already set. So let's watch the whole sequence. And and if you needed to move things or move the timings around, you could, make things faster by changing the time here. So maybe if you want these to happen a little bit quicker, you can decrease the amount of space or time in between them so they animate a little bit faster. Okay, so let's do a similar thing with the line graph. This time we're going to trim these paths and trace them on. It's a little bit of repetition, but I think it's good to review. We'll go to select the layer. Actually, we can select both these, the black line and the white line. We'll need to change these into shapes. And remember, you can only create these shape layers from vector layers. So if I had a Photoshop file or something that was raster graphics, that would be an issue, and I'll talk about how to deal with something like that in a little bit. Just clean up my file, take that out. Hopefully this makes sense to you. What happened with this is that there's actually 4 lines together. So when I add the trim paths here, you can see this is being applied to all of them because it's outside, and we'll just make sure the trim paths happens individually. And I wanted to go from left to right, and I noticed something that if I start at 0 and go to 100, it goes from right to left. The way to get around that is to start, kind of invert it. Start it at 100. Start it at 100, end it at 100. Let's keyframe the end here, and then we can go in the opposite direction like this. So if you're finding yourself trimming the path in the wrong direction, that's how you could go about doing that. All right, let me actually see if I can just copy and paste this into here. It looks like it came in, and it's great. So now they're happening at the same time. Probably want to offset them a little bit. I can't select these keyframes right now because they're these circles, so I want to open this up, or maybe I'll press U to open up or expand that layer, and maybe I want these to be offset, so maybe one line draws first and then the other line follows it. Okay, so that was a quick review of this, and hopefully got you thinking about how to work around that. The next thing I wanted to do was open up a different type of file. In this case, you can see I have this brush line that was drawn in Photoshop, so it's not a vector layer, and it's a imported Photoshop file. When I go to create, the only option is convert to editable text, but actually it will not convert to editable text because it's not a text layer, it's not text data. So I wanted to show how you could do a similar animation, kind of revealing this line as you go on. What we're going to do is use a mask and an effect to draw that on. So what I'll do is, with the layer selected, I'll grab the pen tool and I will draw a line, along this line, and I want it to be somewhat accurate. Okay, I've drawn that line on, and you can see that it came in as a mask. The next thing we're going to do is use an effect up here called Generate Stroke. So I'm going to click on that, and what this allows me to do is draw a line along that mask. You can see the path has already been selected as mask 1. There are a few options. We can paint on the original image. Let me pick a color like a bright red, maybe get it really dark, and show you. You can see that this actually drew a line on the on that mask. Or what we can do is reveal the original image, and this will reveal the original image where that mask overlaps. And you can see that it's only in that area that was visible just previously. So if I want to, let me go back to the original image. If I want to show this whole, the whole image here, I want to just bump up my brush size so that it covers up the whole thing. Brush hardness is like, if you want a little bit of a tapered edge, you can make it softer. Kind of blurs out the edge a little bit. So yeah, in this case, I can go pretty big, and this line doesn't really have many overlaps over it. So I'm going to go to reveal original image, and then what I'll do is I'll animate the start and end just like we did in the previous example. So let's go start or end at 0, and then we'll animate and end at 100. So what does that look like? There you go. And you can see, because I added a little bit of the brush, or I lowered the brush hardness a little bit, it's a little bit soft on the edge. If you want it to be super rough or super straight, I guess you could turn that hardness up. All right, so these are just some ideas on how you can use paths in Adobe After Effects. And one thing to really keep in mind is that certain types of layers or data is going to allow us to use different effects on it, or open up some new possibilities. So shape layers have a whole range of different options that are available here that aren't available on other types of layers. And previously I talked about text layers and how those layers are able to include more options for animation.